magical traditions. So,
thank you so much for that, Tancredi. Yes, yeah, I am last and hopefully the best today. No, thank you so much to all the presentations and papers before. Yeah, my name is Bob Clunas. I'm a PhD student in the Cultural Studies stream at the University of Iceland. And yeah, I'm just going to bring up my screen. So let's just do that now. And there you go. Can you see that? Perfectly. All right. So yeah, I'm going to give hopefully a quick presentation on the ideas of traditions and their construction or invention, and especially with regards to the case study of the Cybernetic Cultures Research Unit and the creation of myths and occult systems. So yeah, so basically starting off, the idea of tradition and myth is the backbone upon which modern esotericism drives its power, authority, and legitimacy. Olaf Hammer, in his study Claiming Knowledge, points out that such myth-making and appeals to tradition and perennialist knowledge are strategies upon which various occult groups and individuals seek to base the truth of their claims. So whether it be the discovery of arcane texts containing esoteric magic and cosmological systems, or the telling of hidden histories going back to ancient times, such rhetorical practices are seen as a strategy towards, quote, legitimating authority and establishing an aura of unique authenticity, end quote. However, research and discourse in Western esotericism studies has problematized the idea and use of tradition, both from emic and etic viewpoints. This can be seen in the way contemporary occult groups from neo-paganism and Druidism to New Age systems and radical traditionalism all claim a link to ancient customs and traditions. However, critical and historiographical study has shown that such traditions and practices espoused by such groups have themselves been based on recent historical inventions or innovations. Indeed, Olaf Hammer has shown that the construction or invention of such traditions are not solely a contemporary phenomenon. Theosophy, anthroposophy, Thelema, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, all the way back to Rosicrucianism in the 17th century, have all constructed or invented traditions through the syncretization of various elements of rejected and marginalized knowledge, all the while taking inspiration from a variety of cultural sources from the situated historical period. Seen in this light, the restructuring and reconciliation of ancient knowledge to the situated worldviews and cultural landscapes of occult groups results in a process where esotericism and the occult undertake a dynamic process of innovation and renewal. What does mark contemporary esoteric discourse from their forebears is the deliberate and self-conscious foregrounding of fictional texts and cultural ephemeral elements in the generation of esoteric tradition, both as an inspiration and or as a primary spiritual source. So from Harry Potter and Tolkien to Star Wars, World of Warcraft, Skyrim, or to the Matrix franchise, various occult and neo-religious groups transform established narratives, reworking occultural ephemera and esotericism into new and bizarre contexts. The result is the embodiment of a process of what Simon O'Sullivan calls fictioning. That is, quote, the writing, imagining, performing, or other material instantiations of worlds or social bodies that mark out trajectories different to those engendered by the dominant organization of life currently in existence. So seen in this way, contemporary esotericism is about the reconstruction of consensual reality and representation through the manufacturing of various fictions and myths that blend popular culture with historical narratives. So the bizarre story and actions of the Cybernetic Cultures Research Unit, a mysterious UK interdisciplinary research group from the late 90s and early 2000s, is a fascinating case study of the creation of esoteric traditions through such fictioning. Presenting itself as an academic group, a conspiratorial legend, and as a fiction that forced itself to become real through a series of actualizations, the CCRU's unique take on mythopoiesis resulted in the discovery of abstract occult systems that could facilitate time sorcery. That, while alluding to ancient traditions, were the result of a demonic entity from a cybernetic future, seeking to rewrite history in order to enable its own existence. And while the CCRU existed outside of established contemporary occultic currents, their writings have in the past decade proliferated across social media, as groups and individuals from diverse esoteric backgrounds have started to explore the CCRU's work, not only as a source of esoteric inspiration, but as a concrete system for divination and sorcery, thereby instantiating their myths and occult systems as an actual tradition. So let's start off with the CCRU. So the CCRU began life at Warwick University in 1995 as an interdisciplinary internet and cyberculture studies group to support the work of philosopher and cyberfeminist Sadie Plant. However, Sadie Plant would leave Warwick University in 1997, whereupon the CCRU was taken over by Professor Nick Land. From here, it went spectacularly rogue in its operations, mixing in humanist continental philosophy from the 1970s, such as Deleuze and Guattari, Jean-Luc Lyotard and Baudrillard. They mixed this with drugs, rave music, and late 20th century cultural ephemera. The result was that the CCRU generated a bewildering array of texts, performances, conferences and reading groups, and hybrid artworks as theory fictions, all of which sought to theorize and produce imminently the zeitgeist of internet occultism and Y2K-driven apocalyptic discourse. So here's some examples here. So what that basically means is, instead of taking a critical distance and basically applying academic ideas to this new field of study, they dived headfirst into rave culture, underground art and music, cybernetic arts, and these new libidinal theories. And the result was that they created stuff that was part of it. So they created a series of zines, such as we see here in Abstract Culture and Collapse. They had conferences and symposiums at nightclubs. Their presentations mixed rave and drum and bass and jungle music as well. So eventually they were thrown off the Warwick campus, whereupon they embraced and worked with an array of esoteric systems and traditions such as Kabbalah, numerology, demonology, theosophical myths of Lemuria, the H.P. Lovecraft-derived Cthulhu mythos, conspiracy theories of ancient societies, and UFO lore. So key to the CCRU's efforts was the creation and development of a series of occult techniques and practices that aimed to initiate a form of time sorcery and contact with the noumena of the outside. The first unique concept they developed was hyperstition, which very simply is a fictive element that makes itself become real, real enough to the point where it can concretely change events and actions. Alex Williams provides the secular definition of hyperstition as, quote, narratives able to effectuate their own reality through the workings of feedback loops, generating new social political attractors, end quote. Meanwhile, as on here on the screen, the CCRU provided a much more esoteric definition. Hyperstition was, one, an element of effective culture that makes itself real. Two, as a fictional quantity functioning as a time-traveling device. Three, as a coincidence intensifier, which then four makes it a call to the old ones. The picture here is actually a famous quote when the writer Simon Reynolds was doing a feature on the CCRU. He tried to call the head of the philosophy department at Warwick University, and he came with this quote, which is, the CCRU does not, has not, and will not exist, which fed into this legend that we're talking about. On a textual level, the CCRU itself was its own hyperstition. Operating as a singular authorial hive mind, they parasitized historical narratives, weaving complex and shifting temporalities, where various people, events, and institutions, both physical and virtual, became storytellers. The hyperstition of the CCRU became a project of reality engineering that weaponized an idea through temporal mythopoiesis and digital information circulation, worming its way through time and embedding itself in the matrices of virtual matrices of history. In the case of the CCRU, they weaved a parallaxian web of narratives, a series of fictions as time sorcery. The story goes like this. Through the work of Hermetic occultist and US military captain Peter Visperov and radical anthropologist Echidna Stillwell, the CCR came upon the discovery of a secret history telling of the study of the Nama, a Southeast Asian tribe linked to ancient Lemurians, and their deployment as combat magicians using Lemurian time sorcery through World War II. Both Visperov and Stilwell see a link between the magic of the Namar and the mythos derived from the tales of H.P. Lovecraft, subsequently creating the Cthulhu Club. Their research, the Cthulhu Club is to explore these links and to apply Lemurian time sorcery to the Cthulhu mythos. Their research leads the CCRU to subsequently stumble upon a covert and long-running Lemurian time war between shadowy deep state groups in the form of the AOE, or the Architectonic Order of the Eschaton, and with radical countercultural occultists. So central to this history is the discovery of occult systems and practices that were used by the Namar for temporal divination and the evocation of demons that they called lemurs. Titled The Pandemonium, it was described by the CCRU as, quote, a complete system of Lemurian demonism and time sorcery that consisted of two principal components, end quote. The first is the numogram, a two-dimensional time map that demonstrated the logical relations and numerical structures of the matrix, a numerological grimoire listing the names, numbers, and attributes of 45 demons known as lemurs. Now, what we have here is, in the center, is the diagram of the numogram. So it's actually, how it's set up is quite simple. It uses base 10 numeracy. So it has 10 zones, which go from 0 to 9. And these zones are paired. So, so each pairing adds up to 9, which is 0, 9, 8, 1, 5 and 4, 7 and 2, 3 and 6. And they're called syzygies. And each syzygy has its own lemur or demon. Now, from these pairings, you have what's called currents, which is the arithmetical distance. So, for example, you have 7 minus 2 is equal to 5. Therefore, one of the currents leads to zone 5. And 5 minus 4 is 1, which leads to zone 1, and so forth. You also have gates. Now, gates they're achieved through the arithmetic adding of what's called plexing. So if you look at zone 5, you would do 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 equals 15. This 15 is 1 and 5, add them together, which is 6. So the gate from zone 5 is gate 15, which adds into zone 6. This basically is an abstract map of the cosmos. And from here, it's in the numogram that the 45 lemurs or demons reside. The picture on the right actually is a game of sub-decadence, where effectively cards are given basically an attribute, lemurs attributed to each card. And in a similar way to tarot, you pull cards and it's like a form of divination. And what's quite interesting here is that the Western name for the matrix, the CCRU found out, was called the Necronomicon, or the Book of Dead Names. So it was through the subsequent implementation of the Pandemonium across informational and cybernetic networks that CCRU came to the realization that at the root of this ancient tradition of Lemurian time sorcery was the entity, a demon of teleplexy in the form of a sentient inorganic AI from the far future, making incursions into the deep past. Its purpose, to infect and re-engineer events and phenomena in order to change technological conditions in the present, so as in order to enable its own becoming real through what will be the eventual unified techno-singularity of a mass network AI. Now, the CCRU took a huge amount of influence and inspiration from cyberpunk and films, like especially the Terminator and its time-traveling cyborgs. But you can also see this in more recent films like Tenet, where you have these virtualized agents from the future, which we don't see and we don't know, who are actively leaving objects and various other entities in the past, which are being discovered and are effecting changes in the present, so as to effectively, they're retconning the past to change the present to basically ensure that the actualization of their becoming in the future. So eventually the CCRU would physically disband in 2001, with some of its members moving their writing onto the Hyperstation blog in 2004. before signing off and going into exile into 2008. From here, the name and work of the CCRU should have fallen into obscurity, only being of value to various fringe thinkers and artists, or as a footnote in an Adam Curtis documentary, for example. But a series of events and discourses in the early 21st century would reintroduce the work of the CCRU and its members onto the landscape of social media and various online subcultural groups. The first of these, well, not the only one, but the first and probably most important of these discourses was the rise in online and material discourse regarding accelerationism in the 2010s. While the CCRU did not coin the term accelerationism, it was seen by people as a foundational development of its possibilities as a concept and practice. Subsequently, people were introduced to the work of the CCRU and its members, such as Nick Land, Sadie Plant, as well as Mark Fisher, Ray Brazier, Luciana Parisi, and Reza Negarestani. And in the middle there, we have what's called the Accelerate Reader, which was published in 2014 through Urbanomic, which is run by another former CCRU member, Robin Mackay, which is considered one of the ur-texts of accelerationist theory and discourse. Meanwhile, the publication of the CCRU's late 90s writings in 2015 helped to intensify the mythologizing and memification of its signs and symbols of it and its members across various weird theory and accelerationist groups on social media. So, of course, on the right here, we have the cover of the book, which initially came out on Time Spiral Press, but is subsequently being republished again through Urbanomic. So from this, we had a series of memes and online discourses through Twitter, Reddit, Discord, and Facebook. And here are some examples. So, we have here the abstract numbering processes, the galaxy brain memes, and what's quite interesting here on the right is the linking between the numogram and as well the Kabbalah tree of life, which was taken as inspiration, but they believe that the numogram is kind of an upgrade to the tree of life as such. So, the occult aspects of the CCRU's mythos and hyperstitional traditions began to be analyzed through a series of esoteric and weird theory online journals and blog sites. Early works such as the Zinsrins blog run by the theorist Amy Ireland, the Center for Experimental Ontology with its journal Parasol, the Miskatonic Virtual University with its online Platonics, and the work of Nine and Lillian Patch with regards to abstract numbering practices of the CCRU and Nick Land through the website Zeno.cx have all sought to research the CCRU's hyperstitions and practices, as well as expanding upon the original mythos. Meanwhile, tales of Lemurian time wars have inspired magical groups, such as the Italian left-wing occult group Gruppo di Nun, proclaiming themselves as esoterists in an occult war against the traditionalist fascism of right-hand path magic. They have adopted the CCRU's hidden histories as a narrative against the dogmatic idea of cosmic unity and homogeny through magic and reality engineering. But despite the renewed interest in the CCRU, there was still a lack of exploration into the pandemonium and as an actual system of magic. This would change through the efforts of technologists and esotericists Anders Aamodt. Publishing the document Unleashing the Numogram in 2014, it represented the first attempt to systematize the pandemonium as an actual model for magic. Through online courses offered through his Internet School of Magic, as well as Reddit subgroups such as the Sorcery of the Spectacle, Aamodt offered up an analysis of the numogram, stating that it was, quote, the complete metaphysical index to sorcery. It could describe any other system, thus getting at the cracks between systems. Aamodt argued that the construction of the numogram through simple mathematics created an abstract model of the cosmos that, when linked to other magic systems, were able to unleash all sorts of potentialities, whether it be the generation of gnosis, or as a filing cabinet for occult concepts and energy signifiers, or as a map to the three worlds of shamanism. But although Admot's analysis and promotion as the Pandemonium as a system of magic represented the first major step in its use in occult circles, the work is fragmentary and incomplete. While he does a good job in breaking down the component parts of the numogram and how they connect and interact to each other, too much effort is spent attempting to overlay other systems onto the structure of the numogram itself. Both Unleashing the Numogram and Admot's other online documents give little practical consideration on using the numogram as a system in and of itself. There is also the lack of acknowledgement or exploration of the CCIU as a tradition and history that provides the narrative background towards the discovery of the Pandemonium. So, if Unleashing the Numogram represents the first attempt to systematize the Pandemonium as an outright system of magic, then the recent work of a small but dedicated group of occultists have managed to develop the systems of the CCIU beyond the abstract. Coming from diverse esoteric backgrounds, such as chaos magic and Kabbalah practice, they have investigated and implemented the CCIU's cosmology and systems on a practical and experiential level. The work of two occultists in particular, Storm Sprague, known as Neosphere, and Vexis, have developed the Pandemonium into a system they call numogrammatics, where not only do they see the CCIU's work as a concrete system of magic, they also connect their rituals and practices with the traditions and narratives developed by the CCIU itself. So we have here, for example, in the last couple of years, they've released a number of self-published books, such as Neosphere's Introduction to the Numogram, Illuminations of the AOE, Time Sorcery Manual, and Lessons in Time Sorcery. Neosphere and Vexis, they argue that current analysis on the occult potentialities of the Pandemonium have been too abstract and theoretical, showing little actual practical experimentation and research. In response, their books and courses not only explain in detail how numogrammatics works as a system, they also provide the results of their practical magical experiments with sorcery and numogrammatics, as well as building upon what they call a system of numogoetics, which very simply is a goetic approach in using the matrix with the numogram. What is compelling is that while they are aware that the CCIU were not occultists or connected to any mainstream occult groups or traditions, their esoteric practices and efforts in trying to answer a question of how the world and cosmos really works caused them to stumble upon a map of reality, delivering a magic system that not only was a diagram of pure immanence, resisting all dogmas, it was truly hermetic in its construction, yet completely learnable and applicable to all esoteric phenomena. So this quote here is from Vexis in their Time Sorcery Manual. The numogram is only neo-hermeticism in the extent that the CCIU asked, how does the world work? And the numogram revealed itself. The system tries to be immanent and stay immanent. There is no question of belief or dogma. Esoteric fact is not really Y esoteric fact. The numogram completes itself from the beginning. That is why it is fully learnable and understandable. Looking at only the numogram, you can come to understand the whole system. All you need to use it is basic mathematics and a base 10 number. It's not just the analysis and practical utilization of numogrammatics as a system of magic. Both Neosphere and Vexis also propagate the story of the CCIU as an actual narrative of time sorcery, treating the hyperstitions and mythos of the CCIU as part of an actual tradition. Even while acknowledging the invented nature of said traditions, they claim this is a moot point, that the dogmatic nature of traditions are secondary due to the efficacy of numogrammatics and the power of the numogram itself, simply stating, quote, the system works because it is immanent to the world and culture that we live in and have lived in for hundreds of fucking years. So the conclusion is this. The construction of tradition has been a central feature in the history of esoteric discourse, both from emic and etic perspectives. From theosophy to chaos magic, the syncretization of narratives of ancient wisdom within the cultural prism of its practitioners leads to the production of new source materials, end quote, that connect the esoteric with pop cultural, mythological, and historical narratives, in turn becoming, quote, resources for constructions of tradition and identity, end quote. The case study of the CCIU puts an interesting spin on the construction of esoteric narratives that make appeals to tradition and perennialism, Already cloaked in a shroud of occult mystery, they fictioned a world that mixed magic with underground art and music, weird fiction, cyberpunk, and radical philosophy into a clandestine map of a world. In the construction of a narrative of the discovery of this map through ancient wisdom and traditional practices, the CCRU flipped the script by arguing that said traditional wisdom, far from coming from a stable and immutable past, was actually being retconned by inhuman AI gods from the future. Through the shared writings and workings of online occult groups and individuals, said systems and traditions of the CCRU have begun to be actualized, both as a map of reality and as a workable system of magic. What is provocative is the way that said groups acknowledge the constructed nature of the work of the CCRU, yet still argue for and adopt their system as an actual tradition of time sorcery, albeit one that has hypostatically worked its way backwards through history, cementing itself in the past as a practice that has always existed, waiting to be discovered in order to realize the existence of the old ones of the future. And that is my presentation. So I am going to put a copy to it in the chat, as well as a couple of links to some recordings of the CCRU's actual presentations back from the 90s. But yes, I am now open up to certain questions. So yeah, take it away.
Okay, so we have already a question from Amir. Here you go.
Hello there, Amir.
Hello, Bob. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. My question is if you can perhaps expand upon the Deleuzian connection here, and specifically perhaps Deleuze and psychedelics.
The whole thing with Deleuze is they took a reading of Deleuze and Guattari, especially their Capitalism and Schizophrenia books, especially Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus. And effectively what they were doing was they were effectively, how do you describe it, taking the idea of society as one that is constantly deterritorializing and reterritorializing. They were looking at the way how capitalism was changing and it was also mutating. They would also take advice from the kind of the mystical aspects, you know, about the becoming sorceress, as well as the especially the adoption of Lovecraft in A Thousand Plateaus, especially in the geology of morals. And basically what they simply did was they mixed Deleuze. Well, basically, the idea is that Deleuze-Guattari's concept of capitalism as this virtual, unnameable thing that haunts all previous formations. And what they did was they basically meshed that with like cyberpunk literature. So they were big fans of Gibson and Neuromancer, Blade Runner, and the Terminator films. Also, they were huge fans of obviously Burroughs' idea of control. And Burroughs is actually one of their tales, which was on Lemurian time sorcery. In terms of psychedelics, they were not really huge on psychedelics as such. They basically take the Spinozian idea of the best way to get out of your head is through your head. But it is well known that in later years, Nick Land basically started using stimulants, especially speed, to the point where he had a drug-induced breakdown, and he eventually subsequently resurfaced years later in Shanghai. But yeah, they did take drugs, but it was mainly more about linking in with the kinetic psychedelia of drum and bass and jungle music. So they were not really big on psychedelics and the New Age theory. They were more in terms of like cyberpunk and overstimulating their nervous system, so to speak, whether it was through drugs or through things like sleep deprivation. The CCRU famously had lots of things like that added to its legend, where that land would have the whole CCIU for like 3 weeks, going to telling every member to basically refer to themselves as Kur, so they were acting like the Borg, or they would stay up for days at a time. But like I said, they were not part of any occult group, or so it's only kind of later that occult groups have slowly started to pick up on what they were doing. So I hope that answered your question there. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Martina now with a question.
Hello there, Martina.
Hello. Sorry, I came late. I had something to do, but I catch, maybe last 2 minutes of your speech. And I guess you was talking about a different kind of system of magic, yeah? Mm-hmm. And my question is, I was thinking about it a few times in my life, definitely. I was solving this question then. First of all, if those systems really work, what is this principle, then they are work, if it's, some attempt of human consciousness to catch real principles, and try to manage it, try to like really catch it, and through this to be able to control those powers which are normally uncontrollable because nature just go its way. Mm-hmm. Or another thing is when people make some discover or some mental revolution, and they put the name of it, and then it's some kind of repetition of a new pattern, and it's understanding, and more it is repetition or more people believe in it, it is actually creating it, and it is creating then it's possible or working. It is like, let's say, like marks or informations in like a collective consciousness, let's say. There's some kind of progress, something. So what is your opinion? How it is work, or if it's possible?
Well, first off, the whole thing here is that the whole basis upon magic, especially in contemporary magic, is this question of belief. And it's regarding belief through the effectively the manipulation of perception and consciousness through your will. This is basically what's underpinned effectively magic, and most magic groups usually take the Aleister Crowley opinion of it. In contemporary times, like the biggest kind of innovation as such has been through chaos magic, where basically even though they have also taken strategies of perennialism, but what they've argued here is that most magic was armchair theorizing. There was a lack of actual doing. And so what they would do is they basically said, too many people were hung up on systems. You had to break like all, various belief systems, whether it was in magic or in society. And they basically adopted a radical individualism and a form of relativism, where they said the system is not important. It's the belief that you pin upon it. So effectively, while a lot of the magical practices and techniques were very classic, like they used sigillization derived from Ostanos and Spare, breathing techniques, yoga as kind of the basic techniques to improve your abilities as in magic. What they said is that you can use whatever system. If you want to use from pop culture, if you wanted to basically have Elvis Presley as your godhead, do it. That's perfectly fine. It's the system is just the means, not the end. It's just, and they basically added a kind of the modernist discourse on science, where they were like, the universe is one of chaos, but through practical experimentation, you find out what systems and practices work best for you. But you must be prepared to drop it all at a minute if something better comes along. With regards to the CCIU's practice, what's becoming very interesting here is that many of the members, not all of them, have either come through chaos magic, or actually they've not come from esotericism at all. They've come from the discourse in speculative realism in the academy, or through what we call weird theory Twitter and Reddit, where they've discovered accelerationism, Nick Land, Mark Fisher. They get the CCIU's writings and they see this numogram and they're like, what is this? How does it work? And they start falling in with other occultists and they start practicing it. What vexes very quickly in a post that they recently did was, and this is probably their heretical idea, is that they basically said numogrammatics serves as a meta model for sorcerous practices that, while related to chaos magic, represents a fundamental break, because part of hyperstition is this idea of unbelief, where this idea of that you need to have belief for magic, but with unbelief is that this is more linked to the idea of hype. And they say numogrammatics doesn't work because someone believes in it. In fact, it will work whether you believe in it or not, because it's a fully enclosed system of the world. It will just happen. And like I said, back in the actual presentation, you saw those sigils next to the quote. That was basically doing sigilization and trance magical practices, whereupon they Vexis produce sigils of various lemurs. So effectively, they're still saying that they're still exploring. Nobody has really actually done this as a system of magic. But what they're arguing is that from their experiment, so to speak, that it's a powerful tool, effectively. So, and they're saying it's, they're saying that this could be the next big leap in sorceress and magical and ritual practice. Big words, I think. So.
Yeah, thank you for interesting overview.
No problem, Martina. I hope you enjoy. I hope you got something from it. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question from William Redwood.
Just unmuting if you can hear me now. Thank you. That was a fascinating talk about something I've only got the vaguest familiarity with, but I just wanted to check, is it possible to generalize about the politics of the CCRU? Because I get the impression that the politics has changed quite a bit over the course of it. Would that be right? Or can you not even generalize at all?
Well, first off, the CCIU as an entity only existed pretty much for 4 years, whereupon they officially disbanded in 2004. Then several members went on the Hyperstition blog for 4 more years. There have been certain critiques of the CCIU in the sense that Benjamin Noyes, in his book, he coined the term accelerationism to denote what this whole idea regarding it was. And he called their adoption of this idea that you cannot get around capitalism, because it's too fast and it's too mutable. The only way you can get around it is through it. But he called it a form of Deleuzian Thatcherism. And also but what I think what's quite interesting is actually the politics of the individual members. I think most famously, Nick Land has become a very controversial figure over the years because he has subsequently was considered, although he was considered in the 90s a form of Marxist, it was a form of heretical Marxism. And the idea that, Marx actually kind of understood what capitalism was. And, it was this totalizing machine where everything solid melts into air. But in the 2000s, he basically took a very rightward turn in his politics, famously writing in 2013, The Dark Enlightenment, which has become an ur-text of what's called the neo-reactionary movement, which very basically says democracy doesn't work. And because it's too short-sighted and it's basically too egalitarian. So with neo-reactionary, it's basically the idea of having the mixing of technology with older forms of governance, like a form of neo-feudalism. His Twitter presence is basically what you could call boomer racist. He's for every tweet that he does, which is quite perceptive, he is also, it's very cringeworthy. But that's in comparison to the likes of Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher has always had an emancipatory left-wing worldview, and but even then, he's unlike others. He never truly left land. He basically said famously, which if you ever get hold of the Accelerationist reader, his essay Terminator versus Avatar basically said very importantly that the left needs people like Nick Land, because effectively, because of Land's, Land is the kind of antagonist that the left needs. If Land's cyberfuturism can seem out of date, it's only because that we have this new fancy hyper-Oedipalized new sincerity. But Land's kind of rigorous hyper-negativity basically says this is the actual world we're living in now. And the left, unfortunately, has never truly been able to grasp the libidinal energies that have been captured by neoliberalism. And basically said it's a form of melancholia, like looking at the past as such. Microwave Adorno is a classic example of this. And so he said that even if you don't like Nick Land, that you should read him, because he's pointing to a way in which how AI and technology is changing how we look. Regarding AI gods, there's been some wonderful talks today about the aesthetics of AI